The name like Soulstice, you might think this is a Souls-like game, similar in some way to Dark Souls, but it isn't. While I adore a good Souls game, Soulstice has the strength to stand on its own 2 feet as an action game more reminiscent of the early Devil May Cry titles, albeit with a heck of a lot more polish, a dark fantasy setting combined with brilliant game design that invigorates the action genre. Hi, my name is DelinquentGhost. I'm a full-time Twitch streamer, ghost VTuber, professional gamer. Today, I'm going to review Soulstice, a game developed by Reply Game Studios and published by Modus Games. Disclosure, I was not given a code for Soulstice and have not been paid for this. I just want more people to know about this hidden gem of a game. Let's start with the meat and potatoes of Soulstice, the combat. By design, the combat not only enables you, but also rewards you for being aggressive. While you're hacking away violently or juggling your prey up in the air with one of the 7 different weapons available, your aim is to build up your unity meter, basically a combo meter but with a twist. Should you get it high enough, you can perform a synergy attack, a big cinematic attack to devastate your enemies with. If you get it higher still, you're rewarded with a temporary transformation where all hell breaks loose and you tear ass. Here's the rub. You have to do this while paying close attention to all the enemies around you, as well as the visual prompts appearing on screen of the enemies not even in your field of view, plus the colour of your enemies and how close to overcharging they are. It's a lot to juggle, but it's oh so satisfying when you get the hang of it. On the one hand, you can rip and tear swinging Briar's arsenal of weapons around, on the verge of losing control, but at the same time, you have to pay attention to lots of on-screen prompts and a UI. Ultimately, your attention is shifting all over the place, making combat fast, engaging, and aggressive. I do wish the hyperstate lasted a bit longer, but in a way, I can see this as the developers asking the player to keep playing well, so that you can transform again within the same battle, i.e. be rewarded once again for playing well, as opposed to having a hyper mode which solves all your problems and ultimately may take away from the overall combat experience. The setting, I'm a huge fan of dark fantasy. I'm not really into historically accurate knights as I find it a bit vanilla, but there's a beauty to the horrific and cruel nature of dark fantasy. Soulstice rides a very fine balance of being dark fantasy without necessarily going too far. It goes places that I didn't expect and handles it in a mature fashion, without ever approaching something like the infamous horse from Berserk. Graphically, it's gorgeous. The setting and art direction is sublime. So many times I find myself admiring the ominous landscape sprawling out before me. The scale and perspective of the enormous city I found myself in was awesome to the true sense of the word. For the story, I can't tell you it was the most groundbreaking or majestic thing, but not once did I ever find myself complaining. In fact, the higher the stakes got, the more invested I felt, and there were several reveals throughout the 20-hour campaign that took me by surprise. As for the soundtrack, during my initial playthrough there were times the soundtrack peaked during various intense boss battles, but overall it wasn't very memorable during my playthrough. However, as I am writing this script right now, I have been listening to the soundtrack on loop and it is badass. Imagine operatic aggressive EDM, absolutely incredible. If you can listen to the soundtrack, I strongly recommend to do so while not focusing on the intense combat. As for enemy designs, there are a handful of more humanoid enemies, particularly within the early game, which fail to stand out, but as the game goes on you'll encounter more grotesque creatures, some with bones sticking out from their body. The developers did a fantastic job with creating a cast of monsters that look the part in a dark fantasy game. My personal favourite is the Abomination. A couple things I do want to bring up. The game has a great pacing for introducing new enemies, new mechanics and new weapons. I'm still finding new things 15 to 18 hours into the campaign, and it was surprisingly refreshing as it kept things interesting for me. Also, I only ever encountered one bug during my playthrough which had me restart a boss battle. Not a big loss in my opinion. I just wanted to bring this up because it feels like sometimes in the case a game will be released and it needs some serious bug fixes. Soulstice is not one of those games. It is well made, and as far as I'm aware this is only the 3rd game to ever been released by Reply Game Studios. If you're a fan of action games and dark fantasy, with a price tag of £34.99 or $39.99, a roughly 20-hour campaign, 5 difficulties, skill trees, gorgeous visuals, satisfying and innovative combat, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at how good Soulstice is. At the end of my first playthrough I was yelling for more.